Hi everybody, this is Dr. Catapano, and I'm going to talk to you today about using culturally responsive children's literature to increase literacy and connect children with content in the classroom. And we're going to talk about the importance of children being able to see themselves in the classroom literature, as well as being able to see a diverse group of children and lives in that literature. So think about the children's literature that you already know about and use. What do we already know? Just think about some of your favorite authors and titles. Why are they your favorite? How did you learn about them? Are they reflective of the life that you lived as a child? Do they reflect the neighborhood where you grew up? If I was doing this live, I'd pause here and have you do this and then share this out. But if you're watching this as an assignment, you can think about it yourself and perhaps respond to a discussion board post. Culturally relevant children's literature is literature that shows a familiar setting. So the scenes in the book, the illustrations or the photographs, whatever is used, is familiar to the children. It looks like their neighborhood. It looks like their families. It looks like the places where they live and work and travel throughout the day. The landscape looks familiar. It shows multicultural communities if they live in a multicultural community. Now you might be thinking to yourself, what if this is a homogeneous group of children? They all live in suburban America somewhere and everybody in the class is white. Okay, well, you want to have books that depict that, but then you are also going to need to make sure you have multicultural books for them to learn what else is going on out in the world. And culturally relevant literature shows familiar surroundings and experiences. I always think about an example of a teacher education student I had one time, and I went to see her teaching a lesson, and she was in an inner city school in St. Louis, and the book she was using was about camping. And the children in the book were going camping and they had to get their tent and on and on and on. And she had set up in the classroom a tent for the children to then extend this book into the dramatic play area, which sounds great, right? But I said to the kids sitting there who lived in a very impoverished inner city neighborhood where people didn't play outside really because of a lot of the drug dealing that went on in the area, drive-by shootings, and just the danger. And so I asked one of the children sitting next to me, I said, do you camp? And they shook their head, and I said, why not? They said, why would we sleep outside? We have a house. So in their culture, sleeping outside meant you didn't have anywhere else to sleep. So making sure that the literature you're sharing and the experiences you're sharing are familiar with the children is an important part of culturally relevant literature. You want to think broadly. You don't want to just think about ethnicity. Cultural relevance includes race, obviously, ethnicity, social class, language, gender, family structures, region of the country, and religion. So using that same example, showing the children in rural North Carolina, a book on camping might be very familiar to them, or children that live in some of our tourism areas up in the mountains. That would be fine because kids know about camping, kids go camping, kids see people camping. And if we showed them a book about inner city living like the children in St. Louis, those children may not respond to those books. So again, knowing the cultural relevance of the text, thinking broadly. So you want to look at where do children live? What are their neighborhoods like? Who do they spend time with? Are they being raised by a grandmother? Are their extended family in the home? Who do they spend their time with? Where do they go to school? And what do they do for fun? If they don't camp, what else do they do? And make sure that the literature is reflective of all of that. Here are some city scenes, and a lot of the work that I do really is talking about children's literature that's reflective of inner city and making sure that the least amount of literature available is literature for children in urban areas, and especially literature that's accurate and not scary and that isn't depicting just situations where you have children of nondescript ethnicity and we've colored a few faces in, but that is actually representative of the children in that community. So these just happen to be some photographs of inner city St. Louis and Chicago where I do some of my work. But you can think about where you live and the children that you work with, and how would their neighborhood scenes, what would they look like? So we're going to do a little visual activity here, because as we know, if kids can visualize what they're seeing, what they're hearing about, that is one of the first skills they learn for comprehension. And so imagine you're 5 years old and you're going to preschool. Or you might imagine you're 4 years old and you're going to preschool. You're going to North Carolina Public Preschool Program. And it's the first day of public preschool. And you're a little nervous. Maybe you've been at home with mom, or you've been cared for by grandma, or in a neighborhood child care program. And now you're going to be going on the school bus to the North Carolina preschool program. How are you feeling? It's going to be something so new to you. Well, some of the first day of school books that the teacher might use on that first day include the ones you see on the screen now. Spot goes to school, Froggy goes to school, the Berenstain Bears go to school, and so on. These are characters. They're cartoon characters. Who doesn't love Spot? Everybody likes Berenstain Bears. What's wrong with these? Well, there's nothing wrong with them. But let's take a look at a book about riding the bus that might be more culturally relevant if you're a child in one of those urban cities I mentioned earlier. This is a book by Barbara Josie called Hot City, and it's about a brother and sister who are spending their hot summer day in the city, and they are riding the city bus to get to the library. And so what's so important about this book is the story is familiar to the children who might be in, say, a St. Louis, a New York, a Chicago, a Charlotte, Mecklenburg, because they ride the city bus and they have to ride it to get where they're going. And they do go down to the library when it's hot to get out of the heat. So if this was the book the teacher read that day, that first day of school, and it looked like my community and my neighborhood and how I live my life, I would feel like I fit in and that this school was a school for me. Now, do I never show children as a teacher these books? Of course I do. But I want to start with a book that reflects who they are and what's familiar to them, so that then we move on to other books where we can do some comparison, where they can see the way other people handle the first day of school. But you got to start where kids are. You know that developmentally. You start where the kids are. In this story, this little girl and her brother get off the bus. This bus is very familiar. This is the number 19 bus. It comes down Tucker Avenue. It stops at this corner by the library. You get off and you go right inside. The driver, Miss Trudy, drives this bus. You see Miss Trudy every day when you take the bus, and you know some of the people on the bus. I feel good about this story because it reflects my life. It's very important that the books in your classroom show both a mirror and a window. And when we use this terminology from Rudine Sims Bishop, we're talking about mirrors being looking in, seeing myself in the literature, but it's also important to have windows in the classroom where I see outside, the world outside. So when we talk about this culturally relevant children's literature, we're not just talking about the literature in your room only representing the children in your room, but also representing the world outside, but making sure they see themselves first and then the world outside. Why do mirrors matter? Okay, so if we were doing this face-to-face, I would probably ask you to turn and talk to a neighbor, but we can't do that in this presentation. So think about that for a minute. Why are mirrors important in the classroom? Well, in this book that I showed you earlier, for these two children that just got off this bus, this is a mirror. This is the bus that's familiar to them, and it represents who they are when they come into that, whoever that preschooler is that first day, they see themselves in this book. So why does this matter? Why is it important for children to see themselves in the literature? Because we want to foster interest and motivation for reading. We know that unless children can put themselves into the story, they have a very difficult time remaining interested in and working to decode and understand the letters and words in the story. So it's a motivation for reading. If these stories are about me, I want to learn how to read them. I want to learn what these words mean. I want to go back and look over the words in this book. I want to be able to read it because it's about me. So it's very important that these books are available within the classroom library. It's also important that you select books that have authors and illustrators that look like the children in the classroom. Why? Because they wrote the books. Hey, this is an author who looks like me, wrote a book, my teacher is reading it, it's important, and now I'm going to read it because that person is just like me. So here we have Christopher Meyer, Black Cat. We have Amy Hodgepodge, which is Kim Wayans has written these books. We have Tia Issa, Wants a Car. That's a Hispanic author and illustrator. All of these things important. Here's another one. Get Ready for Gabby. These books not only are culturally relevant in the stories they tell, because they're written by the people who live in these cultures, they also reflect the cultures of the children in your classroom. So you have to dig around and find these books. They aren't always in the book set that you're given or that you find in your classroom. You've really got to go through and find these books. Why urban or why cultural relevance? Because we've got to get past the cultural, the holiday kind of thing that is so typical. In a lot of the culturally relevant literature, it's a lot of historic fiction about the slave trade, if it's African American, about Martin Luther King, about Rosa Parks, and all of that is very important. But that's historic fiction, and so you need to have both everyday stories that depict children of color as well as famous people of color. And it needs to be every day. It doesn't need to just be on Martin Luther King birthday. This is also an opportunity to engage families. One thing that people say, no matter whether it's a preschool classroom or a K-12 classroom, is parents aren't involved. Parents don't come for meetings. Parents don't care, especially if they're culturally diverse parents and they're not familiar with how schools work here in the U.S., may not come to some meetings or some activities that you offer. But I guarantee you, if you have some books in your classroom library that children can take home that reflect who they are and their culture, you will have parents that show up, because the books that come home with their children that shows that you are aware of their culture and supporting it will be a message to that family that this school is about me too. So here are a couple examples. It's one way to connect families. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some research on reading development and what we know about that, and we've mentioned it earlier too. So we know that children, young children, especially those in preschool classrooms, are developing their oral language and literacy skills. Making books exciting and interesting that reflect who they are and the experiences they're having in their lives will certainly help them listen better, be able to retell the story because it's familiar, and be able to relate the speech to print. It also activates prior knowledge, and we know that's very important in reading. That's children connect with new things they're learning and what new things they're reading or hearing about to what they already know. So culturally relevant literature activates schema, which means they can put themselves into the position of the character in the book. They can relate to the story that looks like their neighborhood. They've seen that person on their street before. That dog looks like the dog that lives next door, and so on. And supports accuracy, fluency, and comprehension, the three big things third graders must develop, and sometimes children don't develop that if they haven't had experiences that allow them to activate schema when they're learning to read or developing literacy skills. We all know that it's important to teach within the zone of proximal development. This is Vygotsky's theory. And the child's current understanding, his prior knowledge, if you want to use Piagetian terminology, is right here. The zone of proximal development is that place in which the new learning is going to happen. The place where the child can connect what they already know to what's being talked about or shared or taught to them. What's beyond this point in time is information that there's no place for them to learn that information. They have no prior knowledge, no current understanding. And so that would be considered beyond their reach. So in order for children to take their current understanding and learn something in the zone of proximal development, the teacher or adult has to scaffold their learning so that they move into that area and learn something new. This we know about cognitive development. So let's talk about how that works within a curriculum set. So many of our public preschool programs are required to identify and select an approved curriculum. And some of the approved curriculum sets might be things like the OWLS curriculum, and they come with a set of books. So what is a teacher supposed to do? They have no choice but to use the set of books given to them. So when they want to add culturally relevant books, maybe they feel like they can't, or there isn't enough time, or they're not covering the curriculum like they're supposed to. Well, let's use this example in the Harcourt Storytown book set. And this is one of the books that is used in that series to teach visualization. Remember, we've talked about visualization, being able to see yourself in the story. And if you take a few minutes to read about the bat in this story, it talks about him waking up, hanging by his toes, having beady eyes, pixie ears, fur, fluttering back and forth. How many of the children that you work with would know anything about bats? Well, some may. You may live near caves. You may live in a rural area where bats are in the barn. But you may also live in downtown Charlotte, or your children may live in downtown Charlotte where they haven't seen a bat. And if they did, it would probably scare them. It would look like a rat. So what do? Well, you still use the book about bats, but you start your lesson, your visualization lesson, with Black Cat by Christopher Myers if you are living in an urban setting. So in this book, the black cat creeps in onto the concrete, down the city streets. Where do you live? Where will we meet? Sauntering like rainwater down storm drains. And the illustrations look like an urban setting. So what I would do if I was a teacher and I had children in an urban setting, I would still use Bat Loves the Night, but I would start the lesson on visualization with Black Cat. And I might read this story aloud and ask the children to think about what this black cat looks like. And I might have some art materials out where they could actually illustrate the story about the black cat. And then I would cover the story about the Bat Loves the Night, because you want them to learn about bats, but don't start there. So when we do culturally relevant teaching, we start where the children are and we add what they need to learn. So we start with the mirror and we move to the window. Here's another example. This is the OWLS curriculum, which is an approved pre-K curriculum for here in North Carolina. Under Unit 3, Wind and Weather, they have a theme here that water is needed for life. Here's the vocabulary: lawn, raindrops, soaked, shelter, shower. I know some of you are shaking your head. Why would preschoolers be learning those words? But that is the curriculum, and there are going to be some programs that use it. And here are the science objectives. And this is a story about a mother rabbit and the baby rabbits that go out to play and get caught in the rain. Everybody likes rabbits. Preschool kids like rabbits. What's wrong with using this book? There's nothing wrong with using this book. Again, what if the children you're working with have never seen rabbits, do not have rabbits around their house? Then what I might recommend is we start the Wind and Weather unit with rain play. This is a diverse group of children who go out to play and get caught in the rain. It's the same story. This is with children. This is with rabbits. These children might be more reflective of the children in your classroom. If so, start with this book. It's got the same vocabulary, the same story, the same science standards, and so on. So, rain play I would start with and then I would do rabbits and raindrops next. So that's how we develop both mirrors in the classroom and windows in the classroom. And then with this unit, you talk about comparisons and contrasts. Children learn about rabbits. They learn about what's in rural areas. They learn about what's in a more urban setting. So depending on where your kids are, you show both. Is this the mirror and this the window? Or is this the mirror and this the window? But having both in the classroom will make sure you've taken care of the needs of all the children you're teaching. Okay, here's something you hear from parents. Well, my son learned to read with dinosaur books, and clearly he's never seen one. So your story about cultural relevance doesn't fly. Well, yes, that's true if your child was given all of this support about dinosaurs when they were learning to read. This is a typical middle class, middle income, white family child having dinosaurs to play with, having books, having games, having a plethora of dinosaur books, seeing movies about dinosaurs, going to see museums about dinosaurs, playing with dinosaurs in the sand table, having an adult discuss the dinosaurs with that child. Yes, in those situations, the cultural relevance isn't as important. It's still important, however, that this child see outside dinosaurs. Not every child is going to be taken or has access to the Natural History Museum. Not every child is going to be taken to see this movie on dinosaurs. Not every parent is going to sit down and talk about the names of the dinosaurs with a child. Not every preschool program has this kind of material available for children. So we can't assume because some children come to school with a set of cultural competence and understanding that all the children are. So you want to make sure that you're having those materials and those books that reflect the children in your classroom to support all learners. And children like this that are given this support at home, they're going to be fine. They need to see through the window. They need to see the other cultures that they're not seeing. And they need to understand that not everybody has been to see the dinosaurs at the museum. One thing I want to note, that multicultural children's literature is not culturally relevant children's literature. The children that I'm talking about that you're probably working with in your classroom who come from diverse cultural backgrounds would no more relate to this story of an African folk tale, than they would the story about camping. Just because it's a multicultural story, that's what this is. It's an African folk tale, The Cat Who Came Indoors. And it's an important story, and it's a great story, and the kids would love it. But it is not a culturally relevant book, unless you have children there from South Africa, or wherever this book is set. I'm assuming South Africa with Nelson Mandela as the author, but it could be Ghana, it could be somewhere else. Where this book about the city bus, about the summer day, about going to the library, is culturally relevant. Do you see the difference there between multicultural literature? And this is what a lot of us get into the habit of making sure is on our shelves as opposed to culturally relevant. Think about Anansi the Spider, the folk tales, and so on. Even the historic fiction, although it's important, it's not going to children are not living in times right now where they're on the Underground Railroad. So although it's important for them to hear about the Underground Railroad, it isn't going to resonate with their life they're living now. So culturally relevant means more mirrors in the classroom. And here's some of the importance of cultural relevance and quality. You look at the cover of the book. Does it attract a child to want to look inside? Are there characters on the front that look like them? Are there scenes that look like them? Are the characters authentic, or are they stereotypic? Is the plot reality? Is it something that would really happen? Is it reflective of the culture? Is the theme something that would be part of the life of this child? I do some work down in Chinatown in New York City, and we have several books about Chinatown and riding the city bus or the subway to get to Chinatown and all the different foods that are hanging outside in Chinatown. And this book has illustrations that any child in that program would be able to relate to. So the theme is there. Language, is the language appropriate? And are the illustrations reflective of the cultural relevance? So think about where you teach, live, or work. Think about cultural relevance in your setting. Start there. What cultural communities are represented in your program? What languages and dialects are spoken in your community? What does the landscape look like? Is it farm? Is it urban? Is it suburban? What's the ecology and the architecture like? Is everything new? Is everything old? And what kind of day-to-day experiences do children have? Do they ride the city bus to get to your program? Do they ride the school bus? Do parents drop off? When they go home at night, do they play outside? Do they play in the city park? What does it look like? It's important that you look for books that will support cultural relevance. This is a book that's coming out in May, and it is all about More Mirrors in the Classroom. You can look at it on Amazon and pre-order it at this time, and it'll give you more information as well as a lot of lists of books. This covers pre-K through pre-K through 6th grade on cultural relevance. And we also have a website, www.kidslikeus.org, where you can go on and you can search through the database and looking for books that are culturally relevant.